We're going live. Welcome to Real Talk, History as a Weapon for Black Liberation. And I'm your host, Dr. Sundiata Keita Cha-Jua. And my guest today is Mr. Rodney Hurst, a living legend. Mr. Hurst is a father, a grandfather, a great-grandfather, a widower, a cancer survivor, and a civil rights activist, a Black historian, a military veteran, and the award-winning author of 3 books. He's a native of Jacksonville, Florida, and a 1960 high school graduate from Northwestern Junior and Senior High School in Jacksonville. When he was 16, he was president of the Jacksonville Youth Council, NAACP Youth Council, and was one of the leaders of the 1960s sit-in demonstrations in Jacksonville. His first book, It Was Never About a Hot Dog and a Coke, is a personal account of the 1960 sit-in demonstrations in Jacksonville, Florida, and especially of what's known as the Axe Handle Saturday. You know about Bloody Sunday in Selma. Well, Axe Handle Saturday was a similar event. It was August 27th, 1960, and it was a racial pogrom in which 200 white supremacists, many of them Ku Klux Klansmen, attacked youthful demonstrators who were sitting in at the Morrison's cafeteria in Hemming Park in downtown Jacksonville. Hurst's leadership as a teenager during the civil rights movement is also the subject of a chapter in a youth-oriented book, 10 True Tales, Young Civil Rights Heroes. Mr. Hurst served 2 four-year terms on the Jacksonville City Council and is responsible for numerous firsts in the Jacksonville community. Hurst is one of the 13 original national recipients of the Corporation for Public Broadcasting's Television Fellowships. He was the first African American to co-host a talk show on Jacksonville's PBS channel WJCT. In addition, Hurst was the first Black person to serve as executive director of the state of Florida's Construction Industry Licensing Board. He is the recipient of numerous awards and recognitions, including the Living Legacy Award from the Association for the Study of African American Life and History, ASALH, and his image appears on 2 public art murals in Jacksonville. Welcome, Brother Hurst. It is a pleasure and an honor to have you with us today.
Thank you, Dr. Sundiata. It's an honor.
Glad to have you. We seem to have lost Mr. Hurst for a moment. Let's give it some time, and I'll kind of set the program for those in our audience. Mr. Hurst is a guest today because of the struggle in Florida around the teaching of African American history and the teaching of African American. Brother Rodney, we can't see you.
That's me.
Oh, that's you. Okay. All right. We'll wait for him to return. But he's here because of the struggle in Florida, and he's a president of an association for the study of African American life chapter, and they are ground zero for this struggle against DeSantis and his fascist anti-Black agenda. So why don't we give it a couple of minutes and let me call him and see what the issue is. And you know, the weather in Florida is something else. We may have to use the phone.
Hello, this is Rodney. I'm sorry I missed you.
Okay. All right. So, I'm going to switch topics until Brother Rodney comes. There's a lot of discussion about the theory of internal colonialism, and I want to talk about some events that I think makes it very, very clear that we are colonial subjects. Now, my personal thought here is that Robert Allen in Black Awakening of Capitalist America was correct to describe that historically there had been a situation of colonialism, but that in the 1970s, late 60s, early 70s, that there was the beginning of an evolution toward a new status of neocolonialism. And that status, of course, was premised on the election of Black folk to manage large urban cities, right? And if you go back and look at that period from 1967 to say 1982, when perhaps the best of black mayors, Harold Washington in Chicago is elected, what you will find is an increasing uh, gaining of control of large urban cities by black mayors and black city councils. And one of the things that you immediately see is a conflict between the city and county government, right? Well, there's been some events that have happened recently that my argument is simply this: that phase in which neocolonialism characterized the black relationship to the United States is being unraveled by the far right, by people like Ron DeSantis and others across the country. And they are trying to go back to a moment of an earlier form of colonialism. That is to say, that they're trying to end black political power, particularly in the form of leadership of city governments. Now, I'm not trying to act as if uh, black management of urban areas has been highly meaningful for the African American population. It absolutely has not. But one of the things that we have historically been able to show is that when black mayors come into office, one of the things that you do see is a slight reduction in police brutality, right? Um, the other things you see don't necessarily benefit the masses, but there is an opening up of municipal contracts to black contractors, to black capitalists. And so this is one of the things that has fueled the uh, the increase in revenue and and power on the part of black capitalists is the opening up of city and state contracts to them when black people begin to play a meaningful role. Now, the incidents that I want to talk about that suggest that there is a serious move to roll back that moment in which that moment from, like I said, 67 into the present, in which black people's control of city government meant that it was more a neo-colonial phenomena than just a straight internal colonial piece. So, Jackson, Mississippi, there have been a number of bills designed to constrict, strangle, and eliminate the power of the Black City Council, and particularly the mayor, Chokwe Antar Lumumba. The most recent effort has been the passage by the House of a Bill 1020. That Bill 1020 is designed to take what they call what is it? The Capital Complex for an Improvement District. And this is a district around the state capital area. They seek to expand it. In fact, they're expanding it by 7 times. And that expansion comes with a police force that is currently very, very small, maybe a score of officers that would be increased to about 150. And in the proposal coming out of the House, that capital district would encompass 80% of the remaining white population in Jackson, 25% of the African American population, and it would be totally controlled by the state, and it would have a separate judiciary. The state would, the chief justice would appoint uh, a judge, prosecutors, and public defenders, and the city of Jackson, the Hines County, which is also predominantly black, they would play no role. So it would be an unelected judiciary. Now, the Senate yesterday did make some modifications, right? But it's still a power grab. And I think Mayor Lumumba referred to it as an apartheid act, right? We also find at this moment that St. Louis is undergoing an effort on the part of the state of Missouri to bring the police, to take the police out of the control of the city of St. Louis and place it back in the control of the state, in which the governor would appoint a board of commissioners. Now, this is a longer history, right? So give me some time to walk through that, okay? So in St. Louis, in Missouri, uh, a pro Confederate governor is elected, Claiborne Fox Jackson. And in 1861, he comes into power. His desire is for the state of Missouri to join the Confederacy. But of course, he doesn't have the votes for that. He pushes through a municipal police act. And that Municipal Police Act places the police in the city of St. Louis under state control through a board of commissioners that he appoints. And he does that because he does not want the Republicans, the radical Republicans in the city of St. Louis, to have control of the arsenal, the armory in St. Louis, because he fears they will turn it over to the Union, right? Now, in 1874, when Kansas City initiates its police force, they too are brought under the control of the state, right? So the two largest cities with fairly sizable black populations have the police forces under the control of the state. In 1932, in Kansas City, the liberals gain control of the police. They get they get local control of the police back. They keep it for 7 years before the state is able to take it back. Today, the state already controls the police in Kansas City, right? And they have controlled the police in Kansas City through this board of commissioners since 1939. Okay, I misspoke when I said 37. It's 39. In St. Louis, in 2013, there was a major struggle that occurs, and the city regains control of its police force. We now have the second black mayor in St. Louis's history, Tashonda Jones, and this move is now being made to take the police control of the police force out of Jones's hands, because it's a strong mayor government, right? And put it back in the hands of the Republican-controlled state government. In fact, it is one of the more backward and aggressive fascistic state governments in the country, on par in every way with Florida, Texas, Alabama. Okay, so you get the point. Now, you take that move to take control of the police out of local government, which is black controlled, and put it in the hands of a white right wing state government. Now we move to Michigan. In Michigan, right, we know about the Flint water crisis, but also the Emergency Manager Act, in which they passed a law that allows the governor to appoint an emergency manager who takes over municipal government. They have complete control of the government. The local elected officials they have no power that isn't expressly granted in writing from the emergency manager. And one of the things that the emergency manager did in Detroit, right, was they took that powerful fist in honor of Joe Louis that stood upright and they laid it on his side, right? That kind of things designed to just show their contempt for us, right? To defile those monuments that speak to us. Now, that government, that emergency manager, their charge is to cut cost. Okay, and this is how we get to the Flint water crisis. But I need to make something clear. The emergency managers have been imposed on 10 Michigan municipal governments. 6 of the governments have been overwhelmingly majority black. Places like Detroit, Flint, Kalamazoo, right? Black and black politically controlled. A 7th local municipal government in Michigan has a black plurality of about 47%, right? And so this emergency manager form of government has been imposed on largely black communities that were controlled by black mayors and black city councils. And again, I understand we're talking about urban regimes and we're talking about people who have performed as neocolonialists and that they have sought to manage the city and manage the interests of white capital. And we can talk about why that is later. But the point here is the effort to remove the black political power that exists. So we come down to Flint. And the way we get to Flint water crisis is that one of the emergency managers decides that they're going to remove Flint, Michigan from the Detroit River water system and put them on another system, right? That other system won't be available for a year or two. So in the meantime, they make a decision to save money just connected to the Flint River, right? And within a very short time, you've got high levels of lead poisoning, and you even end up with Legionnaire's disease, right? 12 people die, 87 people are affected, and that's the third highest rate of folks dying and being affected from Legionnaire's disease in the history of the U.S. empire, right? But you end up with 9,000 overwhelmingly black kids who get lead poisoning. Now, the effects of lead, right? It's one thing to be exposed to lead in paint, and that's debilitating, but drinking it is much more harmful to children and pregnant women. And it leads to intellectual retardation. You know, it slows the developmental process. It leads to hearing problems, intellectual processing problems. It leads to behavioral problems, right? So it has a phenomenally negative impact on young people. And we know that this Flint water crisis went on for 5 years, 2014 to 2019, and it's a consequence of the emergency manager in position to take political power out of the hands of the black majority in those cities in Michigan. And so my argument is that this move, and we should be clear, I see something here about the FOP, that in Mississippi, in Missouri, the Fraternal Order of the Police and the other police agencies have been advocates of this process. So, for example, historically, Kansas City has required that their police live inside the city. And again, that's not a panacea, right? Because the police have all kinds of tricks to get around it. They'll rent a property, 5 or 6 of them, and they'll never actually live there. But it did make a principle, right? That you should live where you work. You should live, particularly as a police officer, you should live in the community. So it made that kind of point. So the police have backed the seizure of political control of local police and placing it in the hands of the state. In both St. Louis and in Kansas City, the police forces have overwhelmingly supported taking it out of black control. Um, and so when you look at what's happened in Mississippi, in Missouri, and in Michigan, and in fact, when we come to Mississippi, there's a series of bills, right? Attempts to take control of the airport from the city of Jackson and place it in the hands of the state. The water crisis in Jackson, similar to the water crisis in Flint, right? Also sparked by the lack of putting money into the infrastructure. So we find ourselves in a situation that I think we could argue that the heyday of the idea that James Boggs put forward as the city is the black man's land, that notion, right? That idea uh, is rapidly being erased. Control of city governments is moving, is being taken out of the hands of black folk, or at least I should say, essential powers that city governments, municipal governments have generally had, home rule, right? The right to self governance is now being negated very clearly, and that suggests, at least to me, that we're moving back in a direction of a more quote unquote traditional form of internal or domestic colonialism, right? And I'm sure that if you can go around the country, we can find other examples. And again, um, I know that we're talking about black junior partners of capital who have managed the city in a way that capital is able to reap tremendous benefits, right? They're giving them a lot of TIFs, they're doing all of those things. But that speaks not just to the short sightedness, false consciousness, and general backwardness of many of these black folks who have moved into local government, indeed, into Congress, into the White House, the whole shebang, right? There's also just a change, a dramatic change in the structural relationship in terms of power between cities and corporations over the second part of the 20th century, right? There was a moment in the early part of the 20th century in which cities owned, controlled the utility systems, right? Water, electricity. Over time, those things have fallen into the hands. Well, they haven't fallen. City governments have capitulated them to uh, and given them to capital. And so that imbalance in power. I believe my brother is back. Uh, so I'm gonna switch, and we're gonna bring back Mr. Hurst. My brother, seeing the top of your head. Can you?
Yeah, let
Okay,
me.
lower it down a little bit more. You see, we still just got the top of your head, your glasses. Can you bend the computer down so it's facing you, or move the camera, brother Rodney?
It says his microphone looks like it's clipped.
Let me. You brother, your microphone is and is muted. Your microphone is muted.
Okay,
Okay.
I've unmuted, but on my end, it shows that I'm the web camera, but then online it shows, because I've got 3 cameras on my computer.
Okay. Brother, let's do this. Let's first get you on camera. So let's move your camera so that it can see at least from your solar plexus up. So you need to bend the camera down so that we can get your head and face. Okay, that's a good start. Now, can you speak? Okay, I'm showing you as muted.
Hear me now?
Okay, good. Now,
Can you hear me
all right,
now?
I can. I
Okay, good.
absolutely can. All right, Henry. Now, what for some reason you're smaller though, but good. All right, now let me pick up with you. Uh,
Okay.
Good to have you back. And I always
Yeah.
begin. Okay, good. You can hear. I always begin Real Talk with a discussion about who the guest is, and you have such a rich biography. But what I want you to do is talk to us about your formative years. Uh, I know you grew up in
Okay.
Jacksonville. Tell me something about the community that you grew up in, the time period. Say something about what was it in your community, in your family, in you that led you as a young teenager to get involved in struggle and in the kind of struggle in which one could be murdered by these white supremacists. So, my brother,
5 got skipped, so I'm 2 years. Was that?
go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
I started school when I was 5. I started school when I was 5 and I got skipped, so I'm 2 years ahead of my class. So when I
Hmm.
got to 8th grade, I'm 11 years old. Prior to that time, I walked around looking at the segregation signs and the racist signs and the bigoted signs that basically said I was less than. When I would talk to adults about why the signs, why the colored and white water fountains, why the colored and white waiting rooms at bus stations and train stations, the response back was, that's just how it is.
Hmm.
Very little about Black history during these formative years until I went to an 8th grade American history teacher taught by Rutledge, American history class taught by Rutledge Pearson. The first thing he did in the class was that he told us what the book was approved for this class, 1955, for Negro students in this Negro segregated junior high school in the Negro division of the Duval County public school system. And he
Hmm.
told us, leave that book at home. That book only had the name of George Washington Carver and Booker T. Washington in the book. And he wanted us to know that there were more Blacks than those two who made salient contributions to American history. So we studied American history with an emphasis on Black history outside of the book approved for his 8th grade American history class. We wrote letters to Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley and Jackie Robinson and Althea Gibson. And when we got those letters back, we had to do reports on them. Type, double space, and we didn't know how to type. We were 8th graders. I did my first book report on Toussaint Louverture in the 8th grade. He also stood up in the class and he said, freedom is not free. If you're not a part of the solution, you're a part of the problem. And he encouraged all of us to join the Youth Council NAACP, which I did at age 11. The Youth Council meetings were extensions of his American history class.
Okay.
1958, I'm sitting in a restaurant. In walks the local Jacksonville NAACP attorney, Earl Johnson, and Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, who came to Jacksonville to work with the local NAACP attorney in filing a school desegregation suit, which they would file 2 years later. And without getting into all the details, Thurgood Marshall came in and told us, as we peppered him with questions, told us about the Groveland Four.
Okay, you should tell us about the Groveland Four.
Okay, there were 4 blacks accused of raping a white woman in Groveland, Florida, in Lake County. This is Thurgood Marshall talking. And 1 black who was tortured into pleading guilty. Another black was killed, and Thurgood Marshall got the case thrown out. He came to Groveland for a change of venue to move the trial, the retrial, someplace else. Willis McCall, who was a sheriff in Florida, Central Florida, was one of the celebrated and infamous racist Klan members who were sheriff. He found out that Thurgood Marshall was in Groveland staying at a black home, and he sent some of his thugs out to find him. A black funeral director who knew that Thurgood Marshall was in town, knew where he was, went to the house and said to Thurgood Marshall.
We got a slow connection there, and
slow connection with me.
Why don't we do this until Dr. Hurst comes back?
I'm not there.
Can people react to my discussion? Okay, brothers and sisters, the weather is seems to be involved in a conspiracy against us. Okay, Brother Rodney. All
I
right.
have no idea what is happening.
Nor do I. I also went out. We're speculating that it's the weather.
Yeah.
But can
Well.
you
So he,
go
what I was saying was that the black funeral director came to the house where Thurgood Marshall was staying in these days of no motels and hotels,
Mhm.
and he told Thurgood Marshall what they were faced with, and Thurgood said, um, "What what are we going to do?" He said, "I've got a plan." He said, "I'll be back in about 15, 20 minutes." Came back with his hearse, and he put Thurgood Marshall. Thurgood Marshall was a big man. Put Thurgood Marshall in an empty casket in the back of the hearse, drove him to the next county and to Ocala, Florida, at whatever point in time Thurgood got out. And he turned him over to a guy who brought him to Jacksonville to catch the train out of Jacksonville back to New York. I was telling that story in Orlando when I was making a presentation. After it was over with, an elderly black gentleman came up to me and said, "Mr. Hurst, I was smiling when you were telling that story." I said, "Really?" He called the name of the funeral director. He said, "I was the man that they turned over Mr. Marshall to," and he and several other men were in the car with the funeral director. And the express directive to me was stay with him until he got on the train.
Mm, yes.
Gilbert King, who wrote a book called The Devil in the Grove about Thurgood Marshall and what happened with the Groveland Four, won a Pulitzer Prize. I was talking to the owner of a bookstore where Gilbert was signing, and he said he had heard of the story, but that was the first time he had it documented or corroborated. And I say that I was 14 then. The following year, I became president of the Youth Council, NAACP, and the following year led the sit-ins. All through this time, from the time I was an 8th grader in American history class, in Mr. Pearson's class, I am dealing with the black and brilliant males and females in American history who had accomplished many salient things in American history that
Mhm.
we did not talk about, but we did talk about them in Mr. Pearson's class. And for the rest of my life, that started my journey. That was 68 years ago. I just celebrated my 79th birthday. And
Congratulations.
thank you.
Congratulations.
And for this time and frame to understand the brilliance of blacks in American history, and to also understand that this history is not told. Every book that I've written, I wrote those books with that in mind, about the 1960 sit-ins at the white press, blacked out all news.
Mhm.
If it were not for the black press during the civil rights movement of the 50s and 60s, we really would not have gotten the word the way it should have been gotten. The white press covered certain things about the civil rights movement, but they didn't have any black reporters. They did
Right.
not have the kind of
That's right.
insight necessary to report on those stories. I met a Hall of Famer reporter who's now deceased. His name was Trez Vant Anderson, who was just absolutely outstanding, was all over the South in covering sit-in, demonstrations and civil rights activities. Just absolutely outstanding.
What newspaper did he work for?
He worked for the Pittsburgh Courier.
Oh,
Yeah. So with the Pittsburgh Courier, with the Chicago Defender, the Amsterdam News, Jet and Ebony, and with the Florida Star here in Jacksonville, there was a newsstand. Jacksonville had its newspaper, the Florida Times Union, had a section in the back of the paper called News for and About the Colored People of Jacksonville.
hmm.
That's where all the black news was. And they did not cover anything about the sit-ins.
Right.
The
Right. Of
picture
course.
on the front of my book, on front of my first book, it was never about a hot dog and a Coke. That is my personal picture. That's not a news photo. One of the white male that owned a newsstand in downtown Jacksonville asked the publisher of the Florida Star if he would print up some additional papers that he could sell at his newsstand, very prominent newsstand in downtown Jacksonville, because no one else was telling the story. So many of his customers could not come in and find out what was happening in Jacksonville. It was not in the local paper. But he sold those papers from up under the counter as if they were in brown wrappers.
Yeah, yeah.
But he told Eric Simpson. I mean, Eric Simpson told me, who was the publisher, so you guys made a lot of money for me because I sold a lot of extra papers, and all of that is just in understanding what the civil rights movement was. Roy Wilkins coming to town, Daisy Bates coming to town, Harry Belafonte coming to town, Jackie Robinson coming to town. All of these persons coming to town talking about the fight and the struggle, and how you can get tired but you can't get weary, and how you have to understand that black face looking back at you in the mirror. And I've carried all of that with me all of my life. Once you get involved, I've got a number of friends in the civil rights movement, some with SNCC, some with CORE, used to work with CORE. And one of the things they will tell you is once you've been involved in the civil rights movement, you can't go back. You know, I mean, it's just something you're in for the rest of your life.
So here's my question to you. Did you have a cohort that was equally engaged with you at such a young age, or were you to some degree unique?
Well, in Jacksonville, most of us who participated in the 1960 sit-ins in Jacksonville were high school students. 95% of us were high school. The sit-ins starting February 1st, 1960 in Greensboro, mostly college students, but in Jacksonville, we were high school students. So a number of my friends I just graduated from high school 2 months before, in June of 1960. This is August of 1960. So many of the persons who participated were high schoolers, and a number of my friends, in fact, over a period of time when the secretary of our youth council and I integrated the lunch counters downtown in Jacksonville, she was 8, I was 16, she was 17.
Okay.
So we were all high school students, the majority of us. And the pictures that you will see online relative to sit-ins, the majority of those persons were high school students.
So let me ask you. I too was a young activist from 14 on, and I remember a boycott of the public schools that we pulled off. And one of the things that we ended up doing, right, there was a group of 20 somethings, and some of them were in their 40s. And this was a group of men who brought the concept of black power to my town, right, Decatur, Illinois, called LABA, the Local Association for Black Action. And we had pastors and folks who weren't on board with the boycott. And so a large community meeting was held in one of the largest black churches where we young people got to present our case in terms of why we were boycotting. And we, of course, succeeded in convincing the adults to support us. Can you talk about the degree to which I know you've talked about the one school teacher who headed up the NAACP youth. To what extent were adults involved in any way with these sit-ins that you say were done overwhelmingly by high school students?
Well, Mr. Pearson and I were on the board, executive board of the local branch, Jacksonville branch, NAACP, but all of the sit-inners were young adults and high school students. We had a white student from Florida State who was later beaten, jailed and beaten in the jail as a result of his being involved with us. But this was a youth council project. Youth council, the oldest person in the youth council was 21. I can remember going to, there's a place in South Carolina called Frogmore, South Carolina, the St. Helena Islands, right out from Beaufort, which is owned by Quakers. And there's a place there called the Penn Center.
Yes, absolutely.
And it was the only place on the Eastern Coast where we can go and talk with security and not worry about someone coming to where we were. During those days, I went there 3 times to different meetings. I met Marion Barry, who was the first chair of SNCC, and Charles McDough, who was the second, and then John Lewis. I met all of them there, and they were not personalities then.
Yes,
they were young adults, some just out of their teens, some still in their teens, and they were getting their act together, if you will. Dinah Nash, James Bevel, all of them, we got a chance to meet. They called me the kid because I was the youngest person there. But all of that influences who you are and your commitment. When I speak at groups, I hear people from time to time say, "Oh, Mr. Hurst, you're just so passionate about." No, I am committed to what I do. When you're passionate, it's about like an ice cream or someone you love or a particular sports team.
That's right.
But when it comes to civil rights, you are committed to that. And when I talk
really
about race,
that distinction that you made, that's wonderful, clarifying distinction. I want to ask you about probably the most famous moment, the moment that you chronicle in that first book. It's not about a hamburger. It's not about a hot dog and a Coke. And that's the axe handle Saturday. You know, most people know Bloody Sunday in Selma, but axe handle Saturday is not as well known, and you chronicle it. So can you tell us about the sit-ins that you were a part of and playing a leadership role in, and that moment when the white supremacists come in with axe handles and baseball bats, and that struggle? Can you give us the firsthand account of that struggle?
When we would sit in, we would meet at a black church in close proximity to downtown, and we would leave in 2s and 3s going to sit in. On August 27th, after some black teenagers had to walk Richard Parker out, the white student, because whites who were standing behind us after Woolworth and Grant's and other stores closed the lunch counters, yelling the racial epithets then that they would yell now. They somehow figured that because he was white sitting in with us, that he was the leader. So he became that.
I wonder how they would get such an idea.
Yeah, he was that nigger-loving racial agitator. And they were involved in building a number of constructing a number of buildings in downtown Jacksonville, and some construction workers came into Woolworth the same day that he sat in with us. Bottom line, some young teenagers, black teenagers, had to walk him out of Woolworths, or he very easily could have been pulled off of those seats because he was white. On August 27th, 1960, Mr. Pearson got a call saying that there was some strange goings on at Hemming Park, which is right in the middle of downtown Jacksonville, and it opens up as a park, block square. And there were several restaurants and department stores that open into that park. So you walk from the park across the street in some of these stores. So it was a gathering hold. Whites would mostly sit on one side because the buses coming in from white Jacksonville will put them out on one street. The buses coming from black Jacksonville would put blacks off on another street. And many of those blacks that were put off then would go over to the other side of the park to catch the bus going to work in white homes. Mr. Pearson rode down that day and he saw whites in Confederate uniforms, and there was a sign next to a station wagon that said free axe handles. The entire time we sat in the 2 weeks, we never saw police. When we did the 40th commemoration of the sit-ins and axe handles Saturday, I met an FBI informant who was at the meeting.
African American or Euro American? Black or white?
Oh no, he was white. He was put with the Klan by the FBI to find out what was going on. And the Thursday before Axe Handle Saturday, the Klan had a meeting in a major downtown restaurant in Jacksonville. He wrote up the report to tell them that the Klan was preparing to start a race war in Jacksonville, with the sit-ins being the jumping off point, if you will. And his report given to his FBI handler, who in turn put it on the desk of Dale Carson, who was a former FBI agent and who was the sheriff in Duval County, only to have that report intercepted by one of Dale Carson's lieutenants, who we found out later was a member of the Klan. So there were no police downtown. They were passing out the axe handles. So Mr. Pearson said to us when we would always meet before we would go downtown, he said there were strange goings on and something could happen today. But we voted still
to go.
My pastor called it healthy fear, but confirmed courage. And the whole concept of being a part of the solution and not a part of the problem, and fighting racism, as corny as it sounds, was uppermost in my mind. So when I talked to the youth council members as president, and I asked them if they wanted to vote as to whether or not they would demonstrate that day, we voted, but I think only 3 of the 40 plus that we had voted not to demonstrate that day. But we went to Grants instead of Woolworth. Woolworth had 85 seats in their white lunch counter, and we always, when we sat there, had more than 85. Grants had a smaller number, but we had enough demonstrators to sit at Grants.
Okay.
So when the Klan members found out we were at Grants, then as we would always sit longer than the lunchtime, because if they wanted their racism and there were no microwave ovens or convection ovens, we wanted to make sure that their racism would be expensive to them. But when we came out, it was like a panorama. I saw a TV man up on a small truck. He later was knocked off the truck. And then I saw a crowd coming down the street after us and couldn't quite figure out what was happening and what they were doing. And then I saw that blacks who were just shopping downtown, not a part of the youth council, were being swung at and hit. And then later, when it was closer, I saw that they were being hit with these axe handles and baseball bats. Stores started closing their doors. And if you were in the stores, you stayed in the stores. If you were not in the stores, had to find some safety. And all we could do is run. The young ladies who were sitting in, we got them in as we could, and then again there were police. I later found out from the FBI informant that the National Guard was on standby at 2 locations and the police were on standby, but none of them managed to come to downtown Jacksonville until blacks from the black district in Jacksonville heard about what was going on, and they made their way downtown to protect and serve. They jumped on the youth council. So then they went downtown, and then police came from everywhere and shut down downtown after that time.
Would I be correct to
Um,
say that the young men and women who came and joined and protected the youth council were members of what we call street organizations, and what
Street
white folks?
organizations, yeah, yeah, yeah. Again, the Black Business District in Jacksonville, Ashley Street, which was very well known throughout the South, part of the Chitlin Circuit, if you will. Jacksonville had some very prominent clubs as part of the Chitlin Circuit, and it had that legacy, and it was a very popular place to be on a Saturday. And they came downtown, and again, police came from everywhere. And we were able. There's a good friend of mine is named Keith Beauchamp, who did the Untold Story of
Yeah,
Emmett
yeah,
Till.
Till, absolutely,
Yeah,
absolutely.
and is one of the producers of Till the movie.
Yes.
I call him my little brother. He calls me his big brother.
Okay.
And he's been to Jacksonville. In fact, I brought him to town in 2009 for the 100th anniversary of the NAACP and the commemoration here in Jacksonville. But he sent me about 4 hours of civil rights film about Jacksonville and other places in the South. And I was able to get some film that I had never seen before. This was about 7 or 8 years ago. And for the first time, I saw some film that I knew was out there because this guy was filming. But again, the television stations and the newspapers basically told their reporters don't cover anything about it. In fact, in 2010, one of the op-ed columnists for the Florida Times-Union went and found a number of persons who had retired both from the television stations and the Times-Union and wrote about it. And he entitled his op-ed column, Axe Handle Saturday, How We Let You Down. Because nothing
Is that how it got its name, Axe Handle Saturday?
the press gave it Axe Handle Saturday, and I don't know from what part of the press that came. The day after Axe Handle Saturday, we had a major mass meeting. Ruby Hurley came to town. She was the regional director. And we announced the boycott of downtown stores and also the Times-Union. We had visits from the Civil Rights Commission who asked for a cooling off period. We gave it to them. They did nothing, and we resumed the sit-ins. But yeah, the press, the white press, gave it the name Axe Handle Saturday.
Dr. Hurst, I want to ask you about mass meetings and organizations, and I'm doing this because here's the conception that I've worked with and what I teach to my students, right? The people who are kidnapped and raided and brought to the United States, those several hundred African ethnicities are largely from the smaller communities, groups like the Balanta. And these are groups in which they operated off of almost pure democracy, but with, a gender kind of suppression, so that the elder men represented their family, and while women and children were there part of the council, they didn't have a vote. Only the oldest male had a vote for the family, and they sat in a kind of pure democracy. And that most of the ethnicities that we are descended from operated in that way. We're not talking about the big kingdoms. We're talking about people who communally own the land, etc. And so this tradition of pure democracy, if you read a scholar like Nell Irving Painter, she describes the Exodusters movement and the creation of black towns, and she argues that this tradition of pure democracy remained part of the African American tradition through that period, and others push it all the way into the 1960s. And and that was my experience as a child. If there's a major issue, you have mass meeting. So, can you talk about the ways in which mass meetings function as a way of galvanizing and consolidating the community and as an expression of the democratic ethos of the African American people?
There was a reason why we had mass meetings, and there was a reason why they were always held in churches. First of all, churches were the largest venue that we had in the black community.
That's right.
During these days of racism and segregation and segregated facilities. And that was the way that the word got out about what was happening. When a Daisy Bates came to town and brought some of the Little Rock Nine with her, and they talked about what was happening in Little Rock, Arkansas, and when Jackie Robinson, now retired, talked about what happened in his major league career. And also when a Roy Wilkins came to town to motivate and inspire us and to rah, 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 because of the sit-ins, because of boycotts, because of the school desegregation case. That was how the word got out. It was a combination of both communications and also inspiring us. And especially for those of us in the youth council, all of these, my involvement in the civil rights movement in my formative years at age 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, and meeting Roy Wilkins and Daisy Bates and A. Philip Randolph and Thurgood Marshall and Constance Baker Motley, you don't forget those persons, and you don't forget who they are.
Mm-hmm.
And the fact that they are now, you are in their presence talking to them and asking them questions that you would ask some of your classmates. And that was just inspiring being around them. So the mass meetings carried the weight of communicating to the black community and also inspiring the black community. When we boycotted downtown, Roy Wilkins came and spoke at a mass meeting in December 1960. And as much of a mission it was to make the stores hurt for their insult and disrespect to us, there are some black folk like then, like now. Well, I can't give up my coffee. I got to go to Starbucks. I can't give up Chick-fil-A. I can't give this up. And it was the same thing then, got to go downtown. And Roy was saying, we are on a mission. We have a mission. And the only way that mission is accomplished, the goals are accomplished, is because we stay true to keeping our eyes on the prize. And of course, the mayor of Jacksonville, his name was Hayden Burns. He later became governor of Florida. He was an avowed segregationist. And when we asked Mr. Pearson as our advisor, asked for a meeting, and we asked him to appoint a biracial committee, the mayor's response was, biracial means integration. And I am a segregationist. So my friends who know that I am a segregationist would think that now I'm becoming an integrationist if I appoint a biracial committee. So therefore, I'm not going to appoint a biracial committee. And he didn't. But the Black Ministerial Alliance, the NAACP, the white business community, and the White Ministerial Alliance, we got together to start working on some issues. And integrating the lunch counters was not the only thing. One of the issues on the table was there were no black firemen, no black bus drivers in Jacksonville.
Mm-hmm.
So one of the movers and shakers in Jacksonville at that time was a guy named Fred Schultz, who eventually became vice chair of the Federal Reserve Bank, wealthy. He said, well, let's get someone from the Civil Service Board here. Next meeting we had, Civil Service Board member came in, and this is how he started when we asked him about why there were no black firemen. Everyone knows that blacks are afraid of heights. And since blacks would have to climb the ladder to become firemen, and because we knew they would not climb the ladder because they were afraid of heights, that's the reason why we don't have any blacks on the Civil Service Board, because blacks were afraid of heights. And I mean, this was like 25 of us as a part of this unofficial biracial committee. And he stood on that. That was his bottom line. So that was so not only are you fighting for human dignity and respect, but you're also fighting the urban myths and legends of racist white folk who would just as soon not see us than to meet with us. The biracial committee was acrimonious at times. Mr. Pearson and I walked out of the meetings on several times. The many on that biracial committee had never met with blacks as equals around a conference table.
Mm-hmm.
The pastor of the church where we met, White Church downtown, asked his state representative to be a member of the committee. His state representative's name was George Stallings. And Stallings said that he refused to be a part of any committee where there were communists involved who were using communistic activities in trying to tear down this country. And therefore, and his letter is a part of my papers at the University of North Florida and their digital commons. And his letter is also a part of those digital commons. But that's what you fought then.
Mm-hmm.
Eventually, an agreement was made to integrate the lunch counters. And for 1 week, Marjorie Meeks, who was the secretary of the Youth Council, and I, we were both students at Edward Waters College then, now Edward Waters University. And we ate at the white lunch counter at Woolworth's for 5 days in a row. So white folk could get accustomed to seeing blacks eat at the lunch counter. This is March of 1961. And after that, all of the lunch counters were integrated. That did not include integrating the fire department, which did happen the next year.
Okay.
Or getting black bus drivers, which did happen later on that year. But that was a start.
But the whole idea from the beginning, as you chronicle in your book, it was never about a hot dog and a Coke, was that there was economic justice on the table and part of what the movement was fighting for.
You know, when stores invited us in to spend our money, and they only wanted us to spend our money where they wanted us to spend our money. Spend it all over the store, but you can't spend it over here. And that's insulting. And that's disrespectful. And those white lunch counters became vestiges of segregation and racism for us to dramatize our opposition to segregation and racism. So when we sat in, we didn't sit in to eat a sandwich and drink a beverage. We sat in because we were fighting racism and for our black human dignity and respect.
Brother, I want to thank you for that wonderful story, but more importantly, for your analysis of those events and I want to pivot to the current period. So, coming out of that, with that background that you described, you now have a governor and a legislature who wants to go back to the 1950s.
Mm-hmm.
So, tell us who is DeSantis's base, and what exactly has he and his acolytes, what have they done, and what are they in the process of doing to repress the teaching of Black history and Africana studies from the K through 20, right? Because they're dealing with colleges as well.
Right.
So, can
Right.
you be specific in discussing the things that he has already
Sure.
enacted and the
Sure.
bills that are pending?
Well, first of all, teachers in the state of Florida, both in middle school, elementary school, middle school, high school, colleges, universities, are petrified.
So, climate of
They
fear.
did,
A climate of fear.
yes, they determine that librarians, who are now called media specialists, have to be trained, and then they have to vet and read every book in the library and in classroom libraries that many teachers would have in their classrooms to use outside of school and for their own use. And in vetting those books, the media specialists have to determine that those books don't make white folk feel guilty and uncomfortable.
Now,
Anything in those books that
are
make them
these
feel guilty.
the existing media specialists, or are they bringing in a particular group that
No,
they
these are
want?
some of the existing media specialists, the librarians and others who are working at those schools, who have to, they send them to training somewhere. They come back and then they have to start reading the books. And then they have to determine that these books don't make white folk feel guilty and uncomfortable. And if they do, then those books are banned. And so if the books are banned,
Mhm.
and as a school teacher, elementary, middle, junior high, state college, universities, if you have one of the books that is a banned book and someone turns you in, then you are subject to a class 3 felony. That examples of class 3 felonies in the state of Florida: prostitution, selling drugs, felonious assault, carjacking, having a banned book. So teachers are absolutely petrified. So the principals and others told teachers, well, okay, here's what you do. Make sure the books you have in your classrooms are covered until someone gets a chance to read them. But many teachers among themselves, and this is the buzz commentary that they're using, to be on the safe side, they've taken all the books out of their classroom. All the books they were personally using in classroom libraries for their reference, they've taken all of those books out, again, to be on the safe side. Then
Now, I got to ask you. I've read stories of a group called Mothers for Liberty,
liberty.
and this other group. I can't think of the name right now, but it appears to be mainly a male group, and that these folks are going into classrooms and libraries and media centers and identifying books and taking them out, so that he's got like a foot soldiers, a little fascist army that are going in and checking.
He has a veto-proof Florida House of Representatives, Florida House of Senate, it's Florida Senate.
Okay.
So basically, what they have said, the Moms of Liberty are really the female version of MAGA. and female racists. So they go in these schools and they are allowed to surreptitiously go in a teacher's classroom to sit in and listen what a teacher is teaching, or to look at whatever books he or she might have in the classroom. And if they see a book that they think, whether they know for sure that they think should not be there, then they can file a complaint against that teacher and against that principal.
Wow. Wow.
So it is a toxic atmosphere. The toxicity is of such where teachers, many of whom had my books in their classrooms for Black History Month, took my books out to be on the safe side. Took books out about James Weldon Johnson, and perhaps the two books that made the national news. There was a book about Roberto Clemente.
Yes.
There was another book about Hank Aaron, who played his minor league ball in Jacksonville.
Okay.
And it was called Hank Aaron's Dreams. But Roberto Clemente's book and Hank Aaron's book all dealt with the racism they had to endure when Hank Aaron would play in some cities, and he tore up. It was called the South Atlantic League. They called it the Sally League in the late 50s, and he tore that up. He stayed here for 1 year, and then Milwaukee called him up. So they would start throwing things at him in the outfield several times. During his year playing for the Jacksonville Braves. They had to take him out of the game in other cities. Wow. And he wrote about that in a book called Hank Aaron's Dreams. Well, they felt that book made white folk feel guilty and uncomfortable. So they took those books out. Now, I understand because of the national furor, they have put the Roberto Clemente book back in the schools, but I don't know what has happened to the Hank Aaron book.
So now, how are Black people responding to this assault and this very clear effort to push us back into the 1950s, if not the 1890s?
Well, I have first of all, none of this surprises me. When you have been on this earthly plane as long as I have, and you've dealt with racists as long as I have, and even when you've dealt with us, who Reverend Freddie Haynes out of Dallas called some of us bent back Negroes. So when you have dealt with us, then you understand what the problem is. In February,
let me stop you right quick. So you're saying that there's a cadre of Black folk who are working with DeSantis.
Yes. Who are on his staff. When he gets ready to run for president, they will be supporting him. We have Black Republicans on the Jacksonville City Council who run at large and who are elected by white folk, white Republicans. And the only difference between them and white Republicans is the color of their skin. I mean, we have seen it with Tim Scott. We've seen it with Candace Owens. We've seen it with Mia Love. They are the parrots, the bent back Negro parrots for white racist Republicans. And so when you understand it is not integrity driven for them to say some things that are alien to that face looking back at them in the mirror, then it has to be something that benefits them personally and individually for them to say and do some of the things that they're saying and doing. And you can rest assured, just like you have a cadre of folk who supported and are supporting Donald Trump, you'll have the same thing with Ron DeSantis, who I call Ron DeRacist.
That is fitting. You know, this is a kind of funny, at least I think it's humorous. when Tim Scott first emerged on the scene, I had a friend from graduate school, and so I texted her and asked her, "Tell me about Tim Scott." And she wrote me back, "Tom Scott. He's your typical." I said, "I thought his name was Tim." She said, "We call him Tom." Yeah,
Good
yeah.
transitional name.
There you go. There you go.
And and
So,
and these guys and females can never step out and assert the fact that they're black. They always have to adhere to the party line,
hmm
which compromises their integrity. And I think that what happens is that when you buy into one of the members of Congress who was nominated for Speaker of the House as part of the 15 vote charade that the Republicans
right,
went
right,
through,
right.
was
That
I think his name
unforgettable
was
guy. I can't think of his name.
Byron. His first name was Byron something.
Yeah, yeah. It was.
But when you, in subsequent invitations, interviews with him, you turn your head and you did not internalize he was black. It was the party line. It was the white racist Republican, the white American Christian racist
hmm
Republican party line. And I always said that in my lifetime, I've always slept good at night because during the day, during the week, during the month, I've done something.
I
And some of these folk have done nothing. And DeSantis has taken this a lot further. He has charged some school board members throughout the state with misfeasance, malfeasance, nonfeasance, whatever. In Broward County, which is a bastion of Democrat support, the largest county in the state of Florida, that
Now, is that where Miami is?
yeah, it's right above Miami.
Okay, right above
It's
Miami.
where Fort
What's the
Lauderdale
largest
is.
city there?
Yeah, Fort Lauderdale is in
Fort
Broward
Lauderdale.
County.
Okay.
Well, he got rid of 5 Democratic members of the school board in Broward County. 5. And he replaced them with he charged them with saying that there were certain things that they did not do. He's got this thing about having students not go to school because of COVID and wearing the mask. I mean, and it did not have to have any rationale. Just like when he suspended the state attorney out of Tampa because he said he wasn't going to charge females who got an abortion. He was not going to take them into court. So DeSantis suspended him. Went to a federal court. The federal judge said he couldn't do that. That's against the law. But I can't reinstate him as a federal judge.
Mm.
New College of Florida, he got rid of 6
President.
persons of the Board of Trustees, replaced them with some of his ilk, including Christopher Rufo.
You gotta tell the folk who
and
Christopher Rufo is.
Yeah, huh?
I don't know that all of the audience know who Christopher Rufo is. So can you
Christopher
quickly?
Rufo is a racist who used what was explained to me last week as little CRT. Little CRT was critical race theory. And he used that as a boogeyman. Big CRT, which came along prior to little CRT, was cultural responsive teaching.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, I got that from Dr. Neal. It's first from Dr. Neal, Levon Neal. It's the first time I'd heard that. But anyway, he has used that. Christopher Rufo is he's at Hillsdale College quite a bit. And Hillsdale is a private racist college in Michigan that, among other things, does not take any money from the Department of Education.
Mm. Yeah, so they can do their shit.
And they help with the curriculum of many of the charter schools that have classical in their title, classical academies, classical charter schools. They write the curriculum for many of those. Well, that's who Christopher Rufo does a lot of his work with. So he's on the board of New College of Florida, which is considered a progressive college, small college, not 700 students. So they got rid of the board of trustees under the pretext that they were not doing all they could to increase the student enrollment. So then they took the guy who used to be the education commissioner, Richard Corcoran, who was DeSantis's parrot throughout the state, and they made him the president of New College of Florida at $700,000 a year.
So they like more than doubled. They almost tripled the salary from Oker, who they fired, right?
And in fact, the president of Florida State with 25,000 students makes $600,000 a year. So Corcoran is making $1,000 per student.
Damn.
As the president. So that is part and parcel of what DeSantis is doing. He is in effect saying, well, you know, I won the governor's race by more than 1 million votes. I've got this mandate, so I'm going to do these things until somebody stops it. The legislature is not going to stop him. When it came time to draw the lines for redistricting, which is their responsibility, DeSantis said, I'm not accepting any maps that you all draw. You take the maps that I draw. And the maps that he drew eliminated 2 blacks from Congress.
Mm-hmm.
And the court said he really can't do that, but it's too close to the election for us to make any changes right now. So they allowed the elections to go forward. Now, some of the people on the Stop Woke bill and some of the others, ACLU, Southern Poverty Law Center, and others, have filed suits against DeSantis and the state of Florida, and those suits are still pending. I don't know where they are right now. They're winding their way somewhere. So, and you never know whether or not the way Republicans shop for federal judges, depending upon those that were appointed by Donald Trump or one of the Bushes. But that's going to come up. But you know, in many instances, the horse is already out of the barn.
Yeah,
and he's been able to do some things. And his word to anyone who would listen is "Stop me if you can."
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's the mantra. But you know, when George Wallace said segregation today, segregation tomorrow, segregation forever, that's no different than Ron DeSantis saying Black history is of insignificant value.
That's right. That's right.
It is really the same thing.
Can I? We're getting close to what is our normal time to stop, but because of the weather interference, can I get you to stay another 15 minutes?
Sure.
Okay, good. So can we pivot? Because I'm of the impression that while we always have to clearly analyze what has been done to us, the most important thing is what we do about what's been done to us.
Right.
So can you talk about the myriad ways in which Black people are on the ground resisting DeSantis? What kinds of, I've heard of, I think, two branches of the Association for the Study of African American Life and History have started freedom schools.
Right.
And I know you're part of that effort. So can you tell us about that? Can you talk about the breadth of the fight back? I think we're working on a slogan, a sala, for when we come with the conference, and it's modeled after Du Bois's World War I, we return fighting. We come fighting. We come to fight. We come to Florida to fight.
Well,
So
I think
what are we doing? How are we fighting?
what has happened to us is that we got complacent. One of my good friends is Charlie Cobb from SNCC, who wrote
Yeah.
the 1964 Freedom Summer, and part of the SNCC legacy. Charlie lives here in Jacksonville.
And he's got that new book. Well, it's not new. It's a couple years old now, right?
The nonviolent self
Nonviolent stuff will get you
will
killed.
get you killed. Yeah,
Right.
it's
That's
back
right.
there. It's back there somewhere in my bookcase. And he's got a new book coming out, I think sometime this year, about the different Black Lives Matter groups that he told. Real quick story. Charlie's working at Duke, and so one of the persons at Duke, when Charlie said, I'm working on my new book, person at Duke said, well, can we publish the book? Charlie said, no. He said, you colleges and universities with your university press, you don't pay any royalties up front. You think that the prestige of being published by a university press is enough. So no, I'll find someone else, maybe go back to my old publisher. So the guy said, okay, well then can I put your name in as a Carnegie Fellow? And Charlie said, yeah. Put his name in. Charlie said didn't hear anything for a month or so. So he got a call congratulating him for being one of the finalists. And then got another call, the same thing. And then finally the guy from the Carnegie Foundation called and said, congratulations, you're one of the 31 finalists for Carnegie Fellow, etc., etc. Charlie said, okay, so now what do I do? Do I come to New York or Pennsylvania? He said, no. The fact that you're a finalist means that you are a fellow. He said, oh, and the cash award that goes along with it is, as part of it, there are no strings attached to any of that. Charlie said, Rodney, I had no idea what kind of cash award he was talking about. The cash award was $200,000.
What?
For all of the 31 persons who became finalists. 31 persons got $200,000 from the Carnegie Foundation. But Charlie was saying, when I wrote about him in my second book, and Charlie was saying, Rodney, after the Civil Rights Bill of 64, Voting Rights Act of 65 and 68, we got kind of complacent. We said, we got Civil Rights Bill passed, we got Voting Rights Act going, then we don't have to march as hard and we don't have to demonstrate as much and we don't have to. He said we had no idea that everything that we had fought for and died for would be turned upside down.
That's right.
And the good thing, the bitter with the sweet, the bitter obviously is what's happening to us with the insults from racists like DeSantis and others. But it's also making Black folk focus on Black history.
That's right.
And what people who look like them have done in the annals of American history. I called, in all of my books, I've called American history incomplete, dishonest, and racist. Yeah. And I also,
sums it up.
When I talk to teachers, I tell them about how they are teaching stuff that is not true, but we teach it anyway. We're still teaching Christopher Columbus discovered America. He did not set foot on the continental United States. Right. How could he have discovered America?
That's right.
My Paul Revere.
My 6-year-old granddaughter at a Columbus Day, the teacher was doing that. Columbus discovered America. So she raises her hand and she says, he didn't even make it here. He was lost. He should have had a GPS.
Right. That's right.
That's what you need. You got to teach them while they're young. But go ahead.
Christopher Columbus was the first slave trader with the Arawak, the Taínos Indians in Hispaniola, and his son, Diego, was the first slave trader of African flesh. Paul Revere did not ride on a horse from Lexington to Concord. Betsy Ross did not sew the first flag. I mean, all of these things that teach, yet we will not teach that Alexander Dumas was black and Hannibal was black and the great 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 grandmother of the recently deceased Queen Elizabeth of England was black, Queen Charlotte. It's and I tell people that racism is as prevalent in archaeology and religion as it is in American history. And I ask them, do you know anything about the Olmecs? No. Do you know anything about the Aztecs? Yeah, the Aztecs did. Do you know anything about the Mayans? Yeah, the Mayans did something. Well, do you know that the Olmecs, African explorers, influenced both the Aztecs and the Mayans? Teachers. Oh, well, no, I didn't know that. So one of the things that we have to do, and I've said this to preachers, and I've said this to fraternities and sororities, every opportunity we have, we've got to talk about Black history. And we cannot talk about it as if it's boring or we feel obligated to do it or that it's something we've just got to do. We need to do it because we want to do it.
Right.
And if we don't do it, our young people are going to be educational cripples because they're not going to know anything about their history and not going to know that white folk didn't do anything for us, that we earned our own way in this country, and our history did not start with enslavement. So the freedom schools have started that. I have a meeting this weekend with NAACP types and some other local organizations about them doing two-hour sessions on the weekend at a church, at their offices, wherever. Start small, and I tell them civil rights movement did not start with a cast of thousands. It started with a few and then it grew. So we've got to, by the way, one of the persons who's also a good friend of mine is Dr. Freeman Hrabowski.
Oh, yes.
Yeah, I brought him here last year when we had our inaugural Civil Rights Conference along with Dr. Michael Eric Dyson. And I mean, he's just outstanding. His roommate at Hampton is one of my closest friends. And of course, he comes out of the Birmingham Children's Crusade. I'm writing a children's book for young adults for 12 to 18 about the 1960 sit-ins in Axe Handle Saturday and Black history, and I'm calling it Black and Brilliant. That's going to be the title of the book. Good. But we have to, with what is happening, which is a throwback to days of segregation. What is happening to Black history is just flies in the face of Dr. Carter G. Woodson having to start a Negro history in 1926. So we just have to redouble and triple our efforts. We don't, AME minister, who was head of the 11th Episcopal District in Jacksonville, said once that we're the only people in the history of mankind who have turned over our children to somebody else to educate.
Yeah.
So what we've got to do is educate our young people about who they are.
Absolutely.
So that, and I always tell folk, I walked around age 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, not knowing who I was. I mean, I was ahead of my class chronological age, but still was not being taught. And no one could answer, even though my parents couldn't answer the segregation, the racism, the colored and white water fountains and the colored and white waiting rooms and bathrooms. And then I went to Mr. Pearson's class and I learned something about me and those who look like me and some of the things that they did.
You know, what I like about what you're arguing is that we have to take control of our education. And our irony here, when the College Board proposal was first presented to the Association, Study African American Life and History at SALA,
yeah,
I issued a counter proposal. I thought that we should not get in bed with these billionaire capitalists who control
Agree.
education, and that what we should have done was taken a grassroots approach and began to start freedom schools and use our branches to build freedom schools and begin to work with boys and girls clubs, churches, civic organizations, as well as Black Liberation Movement organizations, to begin to build an educational network, a series of Saturday schools, right?
Yeah.
Where we're teaching our people our own history, not just tutoring them on what they're getting in terms of public school, but preparing them with an understanding of our history, that was the mission. And what becomes ironic is that, of course, the majority, everybody but me, voted to go with the AP, the college board, and now we find ourselves that the college board produced a product that has put us back on the front line where we understand
They tuck their tails.
our own school system, right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
But in this past last month, um, I spoke to several schools here in Duval County, not as many as I usually speak. Two teachers who had invited me in the past, who wanted to invite me again, both of them called to tell me that their principals, different principals, said that he or she would feel uneasy inviting me to speak to their class or to their activity. Other principals, black principals, didn't have a problem with my coming, and I spoke to a number of joint classes. But there is a chill that exists as large. Duval County has about 120,000 students, so it's one of the larger, if not the largest, public school system in the state of Florida. And other communities are doing the same thing. They're having the same problem.
Mm-hmm.
What was good last year and the year before last is no longer good this year. And they are just absolutely terrified, and they are not doing anything. The problem is, I feel like, there's still a bit of courageousness that you have to show in being a teacher. And I think some are, but I don't think that some teachers are really willing to go that
Yeah.
next step and fight
We,
the
we,
way
we,
they
we, we,
could.
we've, we've been having that discussion internally in terms of the executive council of ASALA. And one of the things that we've got to reconfigure our teachers' workshop, because the teachers are afraid to come. And the
Yeah,
reality
yeah.
is
We've decided to
that
call that now.
come and let them arrest 1,500 black folks,
Yeah, yeah.
right?
We've decided to call that now Friends of Education series. I had a Zoom call with Dr. Levon Neal, and she said they're
You know,
not
I
gonna
went to
come.
graduate school with Levon.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. So when you see
I
her, tell her I said hello.
I will do it. I will do it. She was on telephones. I still have not seen her face, although I've done my due diligence and research on her. But it was a good meeting, and she said, teachers are not going to come. But I had a meeting with the superintendent of Duval County last week, black female, and I gave her the sponsorship package about sponsoring something, including maybe the teacher workshop on Thursday. When she saw that section in the teacher workshop that said culturally responsive teaching, she said, "Oh no, we can't do that." She said, "That's one of the buzzwords. Those are some of the buzzwords that's coming out of the Department of Education and the governor's office. Culturally responsive teaching is an absolute no-no in the state of Florida when it comes to classroom work."
Yeah.
And that is so sad, because the culturally responsive teaching was not just for Black history,
Right.
but it was across the spectrum. But
Absolutely.
yeah, they
Absolutely.
have zeroed in on that in Tallahassee, that no culturally responsive teaching, and that. So many of the schools either cut back on some of their Black history programs, eliminated some continue to do what they would ordinarily do, but it's a mess. And the unfortunate thing is that you don't turn that faucet on and off,
That's right.
because the fact that their tails are tucked between their legs and they don't know, they have no direction. The governor has what he calls an enemies list, or what the press calls an enemy list. And two of the persons on that enemy list are two members of the Duval County School Board. Duval County School Board, even though it was nonpartisan, was 4-3 Democrat Republican.
Okay.
He ran a Moms of Liberty type, DeSantis did, against one of the persons on the school board.
Well, he ran the founder of Moms for Liberty. What's her name? Dosha or something?
Not in Jacksonville. I don't know who
Okay.
it was.
Okay.
But 6 of the 7 members of the school board voted to renew the contract of the superintendent, the black superintendent in Jacksonville. So punitively, he's going after those who are up for re-election again to defeat them because they voted for the black superintendent to have her contract renewed. So he's defeated one. He's got 2 of the remaining. One was term limited, and 3 were term limited, including 2 black males. But the 2 persons who were not term limited, they are on his enemies list to defeat next year.
Brother, I want to thank you for coming on the show. I do want to give a chance to see if you'll give us a little more time. If there are questions from the audience for you, and then I want you to have an opportunity to make any summatory statements. So let me look through here and see if there are questions. There's a lot of commentary, and people are really paying homage to you, as they should. I'm not really seeing questions. I'm seeing a lot of statements, right? A lot of praise. So let me ask you to, do you have announcements or a summation of your main points today to leave folks with, so they wait a minute, there's a new, all right, there is a question for you.
Okay.
And it is from Celeste I. What's the best way for young black people, to oppose DeSantis?
Well, there is no one way that you fight against racists and racism. Everyone can't walk a picket line, be involved in direct demonstrations, whatever, but they can do something. Doing nothing is not an option. So many of our young people have to internalize first how black and brilliant they are and the legacy of those whose shoulders they stand on. See, one of the things that we have not done in this country among ourselves, we have not talked about black and brilliant men and women who have blazed the path. I mean, it's almost as if, well, that's what they were supposed to do and they did it. No, they did it because they were looking into the future for those who would come behind them. So young black girls and boys, young black adults, males and females, have to understand how important they are. You can't fight for your history if you don't love your history and if you don't know your history. And the fact that it's not being taught, and it's going to be, it will be taught even lesser now.
That's right.
Than it has been, then we've got to find a way to say to our young people, hey, talk about Daniel Hale Williams and Charles Drew and Garrett Morgan and Granville Woods. talk about the folk who made a difference. You know, at one time in this country, they said, well, you know, how come there are not black females championship swimmers or gymnastics? Well, you know, black females have this layer of fat in their body which precludes them being great gymnasts or great swimmers. Well, you need to tell Simone Biles and Simone Manuel that there's that. Well, you know, black, you don't have very many black quarterbacks because they don't have the mental capacity to internalize the offensive set and to read defenses. Well, you needed to tell Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes that. My point is that because that is not part of our DNA in talking about how great our history is.
Right.
We take it for granted. You know, we all of the people that, and we all know someone who is just absolutely outstanding. Dr. Rabowski told me one of the first persons that, if I tell people who, ask them, who is Kismekia Corbett? And Dr. Rabowski told me that Kismekia Corbett, who graduated from University of Maryland in Baltimore County, when she led the team that discovered the vaccine for COVID, he was one of the first persons she called to tell him this black and brilliant female scientist doctor who led the team and was the lead scientist in discovering the vaccine for COVID. Black and brilliant. And we don't even talk about that because we don't even know some. I talked to people about James Weldon Johnson in Jacksonville. Some kids today did not know. I talked to a group 2 weeks ago. They did not know that James Weldon Johnson wrote Lift Every Voice and Sing in Jacksonville. Wow. And that's a shame because those are things that our young people should know and they don't know. So for young black students today, we have to help them internalize how great they are and how great their history is, and to make sure they understand that their history did not start with slavery.
That's right.
That when you talk about someone like Mansa Musa, who was the wealthiest person in the annals of world history,
right,
who was the Black King of Mali. You know, we don't internalize that. I spoke to some ministers and I tell them when it comes to blacks in the Bible and the racism that's in religion, that when the angel told Joseph to take Mary and Jesus and go to Egypt and hide out there until I send for you, you cannot hide a white blue-eyed baby in Egypt on the continent of Africa.
Absolutely.
And I also tell them that Middle East is a political term. It's not a geographical term.
That's right.
So we have been so indoctrinated with both American history, world history, archaeology. And it's unfortunate. I say that many teachers teach today, they teach tasteless and bland baby food. And they pass it off as gourmet food. And they don't talk about, they romanticize history because that's what many of the racist textbook authors and historians do. But they got to go a little bit beyond that.
Yeah.
And that's what my 8th grade American history teacher did in 1955, 68 years ago. So our young people today have to really begin to internalize, and it's a marathon. It's not something that's going to happen overnight, but groups like ASALA and NAACP and Urban League and different groups, we have to make sure they understand. We got to teach our young people who they are, and that's not what we've been doing.
I mean, you're absolutely right. Brother Hurst, I really, really thank you, Asante Sana, for coming on my show. You have dropped, as the young people say, jewels. You left us with a lot of jewels. So thank you.
Well, I appreciate you Dr. Sundiata, and thank you for the invitation. It was an honor to come on your show.
You're welcome. You're welcome. We're gonna move to end the podcast. So I'm gonna take you out, take myself out, and start playing our end.